Inshallah, we will talk today about a lecture about the teaching Arabic as a foreign language and its origins and development. The title of our lecture will be Teaching Arabic as a Foreign Language, Origins, Development, and Current Directions. The goal of our lecture is to outline a historical review of the development of the teaching of Arabic as a foreign language from its beginning until the present day. And in order to classify our lecture and to be organized, I shall tell you that we will talk about the story of teaching Arabic as a foreign language from the point of view of important definitions first, and then we will talk about the historical background, and then we will talk about the methods of teaching, and they will be organized. As for the first part of the important definitions, we'll talk about the definition of a foreign language, the definition of the second language, the definition of the mother tongue, and the definition of the heritage language. As of the historical background, and this is the core of our lecture, we'll talk about the early period of teaching Arabic as a foreign language. We'll talk about the colonial period after it, and then the open doors, and then the birth of a new branch in the teaching Arabic as a foreign language, as we will see together. We'll talk about the growth of the TEFL. We'll talk about the development in the 80s of the teaching Arabic as a foreign language, and then new challenges beginning from the 1990s until today. Methods of teaching, we will talk about the direct method. These are ordered according to the time they appeared in. So beginning with the direct method, and then the grammar translation method, then the phonetic method, then the whole word method, then the oral orientation, and then the audiovisual method, and we will go to the communicative approach, and finally the student-centered orientation. I'll repeat this slide in front of you from time to another in order to memorize it, and this will be as well my conclusion. After that, we get some information about each topic from these topics, inshallah, together, and it will be gradually. As for the important definitions, as I told you, so in the important definitions, we'll go over the foreign language, the second language, the mother tongue, and the heritage language. Let's begin together with the foreign language. What is a foreign language that has the abbreviation of FL? So, in language education, a language is considered foreign when it is taught and learned in a place where it is not present. Regardless of which variety one takes into consideration, Arabic can be considered a foreign language, FL, if studied outside the Arab world and the Arabic-speaking countries. In Arabic, foreign language is translated with لغة أجنبية. لغة أجنبية. Let me write it for you that we can have here. Okay, maybe it is not. Yes, it is not applied. Okay, so if we are in a place instead of the native language, so the foreign language here, which will be the second language, and we will put a title as foreign language because it is not the native language of the place that we are. Accurately, we can define the second language, which is SL or L2. Actually, this has a slight difference from the foreign language, because a second language is a language present outside, not the country or the place, but outside the classroom. In this case, the student is usually immersed in an environment speaking the target language. To give an example, an Italian student, Arabic, an Italian studying Arabic in Egypt, for example, is learning it as a second language, SL or L2. In Arabic, second language is translated with لغة ثانية, لغة ثانية, which is a semantic call from English. So this is a difference between if an Arabic teacher will go to teach Arabic in West, for example, in Europe or at America, and the opposite. If the foreign student will learn Arabic in the Arabic country. So this is different from here to there. So this is the difference between a second language or L2 and between the foreign language. And then let's go to the definition. What is the mother tongue? What is the mother tongue? The mother tongue is a highly intelligible concept, for it refers to the language learned and spoken by the child in the family context. In Arabic, it is translated with either اللغة الأم, mother tongue, or اللغة الأولى, first language. The two expressions are often used interchangeably in Arabic and sometimes are replaced by national language, لغة وطنية, or لغة قومية, which, however, refers to another domain. What is this domain? As Mamouri Abeid pointed out, the concept of لغة قومية represents the language of political, social, and cultural identity. It is the people's language in a given country, though not always the official one, لغة رسمية. So this is the mother tongue in its usage. Finally, what is a heritage language? HL. So it is not the SL, second language, or L2. It is not the mother tongue. It is not the foreign language. But now we are dealing with the heritage language, which is not with the same intensity of the first, second, and third terms. But let's know it. A heritage language is considered the language used by a minority group, not as L1. So they are minority, and it is not L1. Being different from the language present outside the community context. To give an example, it is the mother tongue, Iraqi colloquial, spoken by the sons of Iraqi migrants in Sweden. So this is the difference. They are minority, and often they are the sons of the migrants, and this is what we will see now. In Arabic, this concept can be translated with لغة أصلية, original language, or لغة الأصل, language of the origin. Even though it is infrequent and has scarcely taken root in the Arab world and among Arab scholars. It is instead more usual a particular formulation which corresponds to Arabic as a heritage language, that is العربية لأبناء العرب, العربية لأبناء العرب, Arabic for Arabs' sons. and its slight variations. العربية لأبناء المهاجرين العرب. Arabic for Arab migrants' sons. Or العربية لأبناء الجالية. Arabic for the sons of the migrant. See, this will focus on what we can see of the migrants, of the Arab migrants in the West. So they still have a language, but maybe the language is not strong. It is a weak language, but still there is a language, and we shall put into consideration that they have this original language of their family language. Okay, let's go now to the historical background. As I told you, we'll repeat this slide. Now we are in the section of historical background, and we will talk about the early period, the colonial period, open doors, the birth of a new branch, growth in the 70s, development in the 80s, and new challenges in the 90s. These are the topics that we will talk about in the term of historical background. Let's begin with an introduction. After the Second World War, the field of foreign language teaching witnessed an incredible development. Together with the proliferation of new teaching methods, people entered the globalization era. Of course, all of us, we heard about the globalization era, and we live it, and felt the necessity to communicate between each other on the international level. The pendulum of teaching that swung for centuries between the grammar translation and the natural methods in Europe now started moving faster as series of approaches were being created, all supported by scientific investigations, researchers, and scholars who dedicated their attention to linguistics and its practical applications. Of course, some terms we will go over in details in our third part about the methods of teaching, like that we read here, the grammar translation and the natural methods. We'll go over them in details, inshallah. The early period. This is our first title, the early period. The chronological limit of the early period is set between the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, when the so-called period of decadence in Hittat drew to a close, and the Arab world saw the rise of renewal movements. This convention allows us to consider an extended time span in which the learning and teaching of Arabic as a foreign language, the AFL, presented some common features. Pre-modern and modern language teaching orientations and methodologies are analyzed in general so that the reader can understand the trends during the centuries that preceded the birth of teaching Arabic as a foreign language. So if we consider that the early period here is between the end of the 19th and the beginning of the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, we have a question here we shall ask. Wasn't there an earlier period than this period? Wasn't there an earlier period? Let's have the answer. Non-Arab scholars who carried the Islamic law. Let's go to an earlier period now. It's not the 18th or the 19th century, but let's go for minutes to the non-Arab scholars who carried the Islamic law. Ibn Khaldun, you know, the famous the economist and the historian and philosopher, says the vast majority of the Islamic scholars are non-Arabs, be it in the core sciences or the supporting sciences, except in very rare cases. If you find among the scholars some who are Arab in lineage, they will usually be non-Arabs in terms of their language, upbringing, or teachers they took from. This is a reality, despite the fact that the Muslim nation is an Arabic nation, and the one who brought this legislation, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was an Arab. However, you will find, as Ibn Khaldun said, the vast majority of the Islamic scholars are non-Arabs. Let's have some examples for this. Let's go to the Imam Bukhari. Imam Bukhari. He is Muhammad bin Ismail al-Bukhari, one of the most important and famous scholars of Hadith, and he has many books, most notably Sahih al-Bukhari, where he chose his Hadith from 600,000 Hadith, because he checked the acceptance of the narration and is the most right book after the book of Allah, after the Quran. Bukhari was born in the city of Bukhara, located in Uzbekistan, in the 194 after Hijrah. He was seeking knowledge when he was young, and his mother took care of him after the death of his father. He has memorized the Quran, and when he was young, he memorized the Quran, and then he went to seek knowledge of Muslim countries such as Al-Hijaz, which is Saudi Arabia now, Iraq, Syria, Persia, Egypt. Al-Bukhari has written many books. He has been helped by his sharp intelligence, good memorization, and great study. As for worship, he was performing prayer a lot and reciting Quran. He used to read the Quran daily, and there is no limit of talking about his knowledge, good behavior, and worship. So Imam Bukhari was an Arab, he was a non-Arab. Let's go to Sibawayh. Sibawayh. He is Amr ibn Uthman, and his nickname is Sibawayh, which means the smell of the apple, as it came in the Persian language. He was born in the year 148 after Hijrah in Abaida city in Iran. His family has migrated to Iraq while he was young, and he learned the language and jurisprudence and hadith, and then developed to study grammar and language only. And we mention him here because the language is the key of the study of religion. The language is the key to the study of the religion. His teacher is Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, who is also non-Arab. The most important thing that Sibawayh did is that he wrote down a book called The Book. It's called in Arabic Al-Kitab. Al-Kitab, with a definite article, which is one of the most important books in grammar, though he is a non-Arab, and he invented the most important book in grammar in Arabic. And many scholars said that those who study it does not need to study another book. He did not have many students because he died when he was young, of only 32 years old. And we only remember a great scholar of his students called Qutrub, but he wants to make it clear here that he left a lot of knowledge sources and a great source talking about grammar, which people still learning from it until today. Look, we are talking about Sibawayh, who is not an Arab, and he invented in a branch of Arabic, which is grammar, a very hard branch of Arabic, and he wrote one of the important books in this branch. So after Imam Bukhari, we learned about Sibawayh in grammar, and now we will go to Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is Imam Ahmad bin Abdul Halim, who was known as Ibn Taymiyyah, and he was born in the 661 Hijri in the city of Haran in Turkey. He was a great scholar in jurisprudence, hadith, and interpretation, tafsir. He was a diligent scholar, famous for his knowledge and serious attitudes to defend Muslims and Islam everywhere he went down. His family immigrated to the city of Damascus at the age of 7 years, and his father was also a scholar, and his family known for their good knowledge. And Ibn Taymiyyah began to seek knowledge in an earlier age, memorized the Quran, the books of Bukhari and Muslim, and studied the jurisprudence, hadith, interpretation, and the Arabic language by more than 200 scholars, and then began knowledge. And he also feared none but Allah, and he always says the right, even if it is not accepted by the ruler of the country. The Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was fighting the Tatars when they attacked the Islamic countries like Baghdad, especially in Syria and Egypt. He urged and ordered the kings to fight the Tatars and fought with the soldiers. He himself fought with the soldiers. He taught people in every city he traveled to. He spread the knowledge wherever he went. Ibn Taymiyyah died in prison because of his strength in religion. Look, when we have a scholar with the books and he fought with the soldiers and he died in prison. Look how this great scholar Ibn Taymiyyah was. At around 63 years, and the funeral was prayed by many people, more than 200,000 people or more, but prayed by most people in the city and around at the time. So these are only some examples before the early period of the 18th and 19th century. We talked about Imam Bukhari, we talked about Sibawayh, and we talked about Ibn Taymiyyah. Now let's enter to the colonial period. Let's go forward after the 18th and at the beginning of the 19th century. Let's go to the colonial period. While the first schools of foreign languages and secular instruction were founded in Cairo in 1835, And in Tunis in 1837, other parts of the Arab world were being subjected by European powers. The very first military and political subjugation was that of the French expedition to the Algeria in 1830, which officially opened the colonization of the Arab territories. After the occupation of Algeria, one had to wait until the end of the 19th century to see other Arab territories fall into the hands of foreign powers. On May 12, 1881, it was the turn of Tunisia, and the Bey Mohammed al-Sadiq bin Hussein surrendered the French and signed the Treaty of Bordeaux, Muahadat Bordeaux, and also called Treaty of Qasr Said. Okay, the first half of the 20th century was a period of opening for the Arab world. Researchers, studies, theories, and approaches on modern language teaching started to circulate within the Arab nations that gained independence from the colonial powers, alhamdulillah, and partially in those countries that were still subjected. The debate and the desire of the renewal that generated among scholars and educators in this period prepared the ground for the birth of the teaching Arabic as a foreign language, which grew on the scientific basis and from the theoretical communications that took place in the region between the two world wars during the 1920s and the 1930s. Some Arab states gained independence from the colonial powers and were soon ready to face social issues and host scientific debates within their new boundaries. Their status of the newborn national entities allowed them to reunite people under the symbols of traditions like the Arabic language and Islam, and at the same time explore modernity through the opening to communications, to contaminations of theories and philosophies that originated outside the Arab world. So now we are in the open doors after the colonial period. Let's go now to the birth of a new branch. Between the end of the 1950s and the mid-1960s, there were the first discussions of a new branch of applied linguistics, the teaching of Arabic as a foreign language. Together with the appearance of books and articles dedicated to it, this phenomenon can be explained with the convergence of various factors, both historical and social. The increase of importance of some Arab nations, their economic centrality during the 1960s and the following decades brought many people to the study of Arabic. Not only mass media began to give great attention to the Middle Eastern political scenario, especially to the themes such as the Arab-Israeli conflict, together with the migration phenomenon, which affected North Africa and made Arabic one of the major migrant languages in Europe. After the decolonization of the world, order changed and the Arab region entered the international panorama, enjoying temporary stability. In this period, globalization has given Arabic a far more prominent position in Western societies than was the case earlier. Okay, let's go now in order to the 70s, to the 80s, to the 90s. So the growth of teaching Arabic as a foreign language began in 1970. The new branch of applied linguistics that flourished during the 1960s in Egypt now suffered a setback in the country. As a result, it crossed the Suez Canal eastward and the Cyrenaica westward to spread across other corners.
اللي موجود اللي هيفضل هنا هيبقى في الزباله بتاع
to spread across corners of the Arab world. Hence, during the 1970s, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Tunisia, Libya, and Lebanon saw the rise of teaching Arabic as a foreign language, which lived a considerable development as the number of publications increased and the conferences were organized within the Arab world. The undisputed Arab capitals of the new branch were Riyadh and Khartoum in Sudan, together with the Syria-Lebanese region and Cairo, which stayed in the background though. Tunisia, from its point of view, saw the appearance of the first work in teaching Arabic as a foreign language only in the 1979, even though the Bourguiba school published the dedicated textbooks and continued to train foreign learners of Arabic language during the summer sessions for the whole decade. In all these places, Arab scholars debated teaching Arabic as a foreign language, started new projects, experimental studies, and had the opportunity to create institutes which dedicated their attention to this specific research field, both from theoretical and practical points of view. So this is the growth in the 70s. Let's go to the development in beginning from 1980. The 1980s were years of experimentation in the field of teaching Arabic as a foreign language within the Arab world. In a sense, scholars managed to go beyond theory, and thanks to their teaching experience, they brought an improvement to the field of teaching Arabic as a foreign language, analyzing problems and issues that directly affected the peculiar case of the Arabic language teaching. Theoretical works defined the teaching Arabic as a foreign language, main steps, events, and scholars' positions. Applied researchers increased in number and analyzed brand new topics such as curriculum design, learners' training needs, etc. Textbooks covered not only adult learners, but also young ones. This decade So the publication of works, one after another. It was a time of development, which can be summarized by Mahmoud Kamel al-Naqa's words. He said, we have to recognize that we are at the beginning of our path in the stage of discovery, marhalatul istikshaf, and we need to endeavor, try, commit mistakes until we make it right. This was like 40 years ago, and now we have began in the 1990s, we began new challenges. What are these new challenges? In the American and European context, the 1990s were characterized by the influence of new technologies and new media in the field of foreign language teaching. 1989 was marked by the birth of the World Wide Web. And the year after the first web browser computer program was created. Computer and new technologies started to affect the teaching and the learning of foreign languages, including Arabic. And of course, for instance, for example, we will find that the videos in the AFL classrooms from this point of view presented the implications of computer-assisted language instruction in the teaching of Arabic as foreign language. Nonetheless, the update in teaching Arabic as foreign language did not originate from the Arab world, though from its strongholds outside of it, the United States in the first place. So these were the new challenges. So again, we can go over the titles only. We'll find that we will begin with the early period. The early period, we saw it in the 19th and the 18th and the 18th century. And then we went over a question, what was earlier than this period, and we saw the non-Arab scholars who carried the Islamic law, and we learned the saying of Ibn Khaldun when he said that the vast majority of the Islamic scholars are non-Arabs, and we saw as examples the Imam Bukhari and Sibawayh and Ibn Taymiyyah. And then we went forward again and we saw the colonial period, the inhitat, and then we went over the open doors. This was in the first half of the 18th century, of the 20th century, I'm sorry. The birth of a new branch of teaching Arabic as the foreign language, and this was the applied linguistics. In the applied linguistics, this was the new branch, and then the growth in the 70s, and we saw after this the development in the 80s, the researchers and the conferences, and it became wider than Egypt. It became in the Saudi Arabia, in Tunisia, in Sudan, and then the new challenges that entered with the computer here and the World Wide Web, and after it the computer program, and it entered the sound and the audio and the video inside the classrooms of the Arabic foreign language. Okay, we'll go now over the methods of teaching, and they are in order. methods of teaching Arabic as a foreign language. I will present each method in a table. And as we remember our first slide, we talked about the important definitions. We talked about the historical background. Now we will talk about the methods of teaching. And we have 8 methods of teaching we will focus on. We'll focus on the direct method, on the grammar translation method, on the phonetic method, the whole word method, the oral orientation, audio-visual method, the communicative approach, and then finally, the student-centered orientation. So let's begin with the methods of teaching. First, the direct method. Its name, it is the direct or the natural method. Remember when we talked about this earlier in the background, is the historical background. We talked about the natural method and the grammar translation method. Let's go directly to the description. What is a direct method? It is characterized by an extremely practical kind of teaching that favors the oral ability and penalizes grammar and literature. A typical lesson starts with the teacher talking in the target language, which is L2, or the second language. He is talking with the target language, not the original language. And the disciple listening to him, the student will listen to this language from him. To this, brief explanations follow, and then the teacher expects from the student to repeat the contents of the lesson, also resorting to mnemonic acquisition. So put into your consideration that this direct method, it is an immersion method. They put the student in the target language. Of course, he does not understand what it is said, but he is trying to make like his teacher. He is trying to repeat what his teacher is saying. This is the direct method or the natural method. It is important that the student is totally exposed to the target language. He does not find the original language. He does not find a teacher who is translating or who is explaining with the original language. This is a challenge, of course. This is a challenge, but actually this is what we call the child acquisition. I remember, maybe this is out of context of our lecture, but I remember I'm here, I am an Egyptian teacher who is teaching Arabic as a foreign language, and I am here in Istanbul. I had my son 4 years ago. He was in year 1, in grade 1 in his school, and I put him in a Turkish school. I remember that he spent 10 days crying that he does not understand anything because his teacher is a Turkish teacher. His friends are Turkish friends, and he does not understand anything. I remember my wife said to him, "You are torturing your son. Why do you make like this?" So I told her that we studied this. This is called the child acquisition. He will get this language, which is the Turkish language, he will get it from its original sources. And really now, after 4 years, I bring my son everywhere because he can talk now with the Turkish people as a Turkish person. And now I cannot talk the Turkish language, but he can talk it fluently. And he is still in year 4, in his 4th year in the school. Okay, so let's go again, let's return. This is the direct method. Now let's go to the second method, which is the grammar translation method. It is very famous, the grammar translation method. We will find that it is called طريقة الترجمة, which is translation, or طريقة النحو, which is the grammar, or طريقة الترجمة والقواعد, the grammar translation method. It is called all of these titles. The description, it was widely diffused approach, mainly artificial. We saw that the direct method was penalizing this grammar method, but now we are in another method. It aimed at the systematic study of grammar, while language was codified and arranged into fixed rules learned by heart. Actually, this is very famous here in Istanbul. When I teach Arabic as a foreign language, I find that there is a Turkish teacher who is teaching Arabic grammar. But me, I teach the skills. Look at this. When I came first from 4 years ago, I told them how Turkish teacher can teach the Arabic grammar. I am supposed to teach grammar and skills together. Not only the skills, which is writing, listening, speaking, reading. No, this is not only the language. The language is also the grammar. So I found myself that I'm fighting in such fossilized rules. This is the grammar translation method, and it is here until now, the grammar translation method. So first, we talked about the direct method, and then we talked about the grammar translation method. Let's go now to the phonetic method, or الطريقة الشفوية. الطريقة الشفوية. It originated in the late 19th century, when the newborn science of phonetics was considered indispensable for the teaching and the learning of languages. It focused on the spoken word rather than the printed page, and on the sound as the smallest chunk of the meaning in the language acquisition process. It was at first exclusively oral and gave paramount importance to the pronunciation. Now we are not in the focusing on the meaning or the rules, the grammatical rules, rather than we are focusing on the phonetic method, on the phonetics itself. And it is not important that the student can know the meaning or even can know the rules. This was a method that was there in the late 19th century. Okay, let's go to the fourth method, which is the whole word method. الطريقة الكلية. It consisted of a global reading that put emphasis on the word as the smallest chunk of meaning in the language acquisition process, rather than isolated sounds or letters, as it happened with the phonetic method. So it is like a step forward. A whole word method, it focuses on the word even in the intermediate and advanced levels. And this is a drawback actually, because we shall focus on word in the elementary level. Yes, we focus on words. And when the student is up to the intermediate level, so it has to be, the focus shall be on the sentence. And in the advanced level, the focus became on the whole paragraph and the whole passage, not only words, not only sentences, but it is the paragraph and the passage itself. So this is the whole word method. Let's go to the oral orientation. It is a part of the structural orientations, a method developed around the Second World War that starts with the sounds and then shifts to reading and writing. In essence, the approach is founded on the notion that language is basically a matter of listening and speaking. It favors the oral acquisition and production activities in the target language. Actually, until now, there are students who ask for only to speak and to listen to the language. They don't mind how to read, how to write, but they want to speak and they want to listen only to the language, to the target language. Even if this is something that is weak, but look, they are focusing on the listening and speaking, especially on listening and speaking. And this is the oral orientation. Okay, let's go to the sixth method, which is the structural global audiovisual method. The method is today part of the structural orientations. Of course, we have the TVs and we have the screens and the mobiles. So the audiovisual method became very important nowadays. It was developed by the Croatian scholar Peter Gubriana together with the French Paul Revenek. This method distinguished itself from the oral approach, firstly for the fact of that the former was of the European origin, while the later was developed in the United States between the 1940s and the 1960s. Secondly, this method, which is the audiovisual method, put great emphasis on comprehension, while the oral approach was content with providing learners with auditory patterns, leaving comprehension to a later stage. So now we are in a step forward with the audio-visual method. Let's go now to the seventh method, which is the communicative approach. The communicative approach originated in the 1970s, and it showed general deconstruction of the previous theories on the language learning and teaching. In this sense, it shifted the focus of language study to social conventions and the appropriate use of language in a given socio-cultural context. It also concentrated on the language acquisition process rather than the language itself. Look at the language acquisition, as I told you about the child acquisition. So favoring a transformation inside the classroom walls, the student became an active protagonist of the acquisition process and the teacher a facilitator rather than a leader. We often call this, which is the post-era in teaching Arabic as a foreign language. Post-era, which is very new approach, the communicative approach, and a part of the communicative approach is the eighth orientation or method, which is learner-centered orientation. The learner-centered orientation is part of the communicative approach. It is a part of it, as it is considered of its developments. It focuses on the students' interests and training needs. Moreover, it aims to develop functional competence in students rather than simply a communicative one. Actually, we shall make like an equilibrium between that learner is the center in the learning and between the teacher is teaching new concepts. We shall have an equilibrium. The essential part that makes it in equivalence when you tell an information that student can originate and can tell himself, so stop as a teacher of saying it and try to encourage student to say it himself. If he cannot say this information, so try to teach it and explain it and give it its time. So this is an equilibrium between teaching and learning this language. Again, we will conclude here that we have the story that we told is in three main points: important definitions and the historical background, finally, the methods of teaching. We talked in the important definitions about the definition of foreign language, of second language, of mother tongue, and heritage language. In the historical background, we passed over the early period and then the colonial period, the open doors, the birth of a new branch, the growth in the 70s, the development in the 80s, and finally, new challenges beginning from the 90s. In the methods of teaching, we talked about the direct method, the grammar translation method, the phonetic method, the whole word method, the oral orientation, the audiovisual method, the communicative approach, and finally, the student-centered orientation. This was a brief about teaching Arabic as a foreign language in a story. And as I told you, this is the most important slide that will summarize what we were talking about. And thank you for listening to this lecture.
Dr. EHAB, mashallah. It's a great lecture, a lot of information there. So please, everyone, if you have any questions, feel free, inshallah, to share the questions with me, or you can actually unmute yourself and speak directly to Dr. EHAB if you like to do so. Meanwhile, I actually have a couple of questions as well. So if you don't mind, Dr. EHAB, if I can just, yeah. So the first thing, mashallah, there are different methods. I'm just wondering, based on your experience, is there, the best method? I can imagine that the best is the direct method based on the story that you said for, that happened with your son. But is this something like agreed upon, or is the best method is actually a hybrid method that is, combining all of those? And is the method here, like, does the method depend on the teacher or the learner? Just some questions like came to my mind when you were presenting this stuff. So if you can just elaborate more on that, that would be great, inshallah.
Yes, of course. I want to tell you that when I mentioned about my child, I mentioned child acquisition, not learning. There is no method for this. This is an acquisition. He is like that. He is exposed and immersed in this environment, this new environment. And of course, this is a direct method, but this cannot be the method for the older learners. If this is for child acquisition, but other learners, they shall have other, let's say, not methods, but let's say criteria for the proficiency. Because of this, they beginning from this 21st century, they call this century of the post-era method. There is no only one method. And you may, all of you may notice that at the end, we will find that it became like the communicative approach, not method. The term of method, we exceeded this term now. And as you said, maybe a hybrid, this hybrid, we can say that this is not a specific method, rather than being an approach for like the student-centered classroom and the communicative approach and the like.
MashaAllah. So I'm also wondering, are these methods only for learning Arabic or for other languages as well? Is it like, this is teaching a language as a foreign language or teaching Arabic as a foreign language?
Yes, this is for teaching any language as a foreign language. Actually, we have TOEFL, which is teaching Arabic as a foreign language, and you will find in the American University in Cairo, you will find the TOEFL, teaching English as a foreign language as well.
It's not ESL.
This department and this department.
Okay.
So actually teaching, and of course, we have here in Istanbul something called Tamer, and I don't know the abbreviation of Tamer is what, but it is a way of teaching Turkish as a foreign language as well, that I was supposed to learn Turkish in this department, but I did not. You shall know this, I did not until now, after 4 years. And so you will find that these are methods of teaching languages, actually. And the Arabic, this was a language of languages, and it was, it took these methods actually from the English sources and from the English scholars, not only from the Arabic or the like. Maybe the period of like Ibn Taymiyyah and Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi and Sibawayh, and before them Imam Bukhari, maybe they learned languages, mashallah, they learned the Arabic language and fluently, and without having these new methods or approaches in learning Arabic as a foreign language.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to share something. This is just one of the videos. I see like you use some similar videos. So I can inshallah play these videos just like 1 minute. And if you can elaborate on that method of teaching that you use in your classes, I think that would be a good idea. Okay.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
كيف حالك؟
بخير والحمد لله.
أنا اسمي قاسم. وأنت ما اسمك؟
أنا اسمي علي. من أين أنت يا قاسم؟
أنا من تركيا. أنا تركي. وأنت ما جنسيتك؟
أنا لبناني.
تشرفنا.
تشرفنا بك.
إلى اللقاء.
مع السلامة.
صباح الخير.
صباح النور.
كيف حالك؟
بخير والحمد لله.
أنا اسمي قاسم. وأنت ما اسمك؟
اسمي كبرى. من أين أنت يا قاسم؟
أنا من سوريا. وأنت ما جنسيتك؟
أنا مصرية.
أهلا وسهلا.
أهلا بك.
إلى اللقاء.
So, that short conversation in 1 minute and a half, someone introducing himself, asking about his background or his citizenship or where do you come from, all this stuff. This one video, like how long actually do you teach this topic in a class? Is it just 1 minute to show a video like that? Can someone watch these videos and say like, I don't need to have a TFL course, like I'm good. YouTube is full of stuff like that. So what would be your response for that?
Okay, maybe some of our guests here are some of my students. Yes. And they know that I introduced this video before when I was teaching the acquaintance, which is the first lesson in the elementary level. Actually, this video is, let's say that it is a level after that I teach students the terminologies of how to make salutation, like Sabahul Khair, Sabahul Nur, Assalamu alaikum, كيف حالك, من أين أنت, and the like. So after this, they got used to know, to write, to listen, to read these dialogues, and they find something like this video in front of them. And of course, the application is what I mean, because I don't want only to stop at the level of they acquire and they take, they listen to the information, but 2 by 2 students, pairs, they try to imitate this video. They try to make like what they saw and they listen to. And of course, you may listen here, and this is a very important point, that the people are talking with the tashkil. They كيف حالك and اسمي قاسم and the like. And this is because of the grammar translation method. This video was in Turkey.
Okay.
And this is because of this. They focus on the correct pronunciation and the articulation and the tashkil, the grammatical points. And it is a step forward that they also went to the audiovisual method. So this is a very important video, and I like this video and other videos in this level And maybe even in my tests, when I make tests, you will find that I put a part of the test with the audio-visual interpretation or the like. So it is important to put it during my explanation.
Mashallah. So I think a general question here that people may thought of is, like, how long does it take from a student who doesn't know Arabic at all to be confident, in saying that I know Arabic, or I can approach the Quran, or I can open an Arabic book? And if you can give me an answer that is for, like, two answers. One answer for a student who is just dedicating himself, like, you know what, I'm gonna stop my my affairs, all my education, everything else, and they're gonna focus on Arabic. How long does it take, right? And for another student who just gonna focus on weekends, and so yeah, if you can just share some thoughts about that, that would be great, inshallah.
Okay. Let's say that I don't want to talk as a whole that he can now be fluent in Arabic. I want to talk about levels. So if I said that this student exceeded the elementary level, that he can know the basics of reading, writing, listening, speaking in Arabic, the basics. He can now use sentences. He can now know the basics of the grammar. So he needs between 150 and 200 hours of learning Arabic. Of course, these are not the contact hours between the teacher and the student only, but I mean 150 to 200 contact with the language itself. Maybe the classes will be like 30 hours, 50 hours, and the like, but he will have homework. He will stay on his desk, and he will try to listen to talk about the Arabic language. So this is important that students put the first level like the elementary level. The like, if I said from 200 to 250 hours for the intermediate level. The intermediate level, the most difficult thing in it is that he will try to read sentences, and you will find that the grammar now became the part of the grammar, and as well it will come to a sarf, so more branches and structures will enter. Of course, when we will go to the fluent level, to the advanced level, you will find that he can now read books, newspapers, and will talk with the native persons of the Arabic language. This will need like from 250 to 300 hours of contact with the Arabic language.
Mm-hmm. So with respect to this language, is it, we call it modern, or is this the classical Arabic, or what kind of Arabic is that?
No, we are talking about the modern standard Arabic. Because actually, we will, if we want to talk about the classical Arabic, we shall go to the books, to the ancient books, mm-hmm. and we shall talk about this. I assume that no criteria were put for this except the experience, mm-hmm. except the experience. So we will start like with small sentences with discrete words and the like, but it is not, there is no, of course, I cannot say that the European framework, for example, gave a criteria for the classical Arabic. No, there is nothing like this. Or even the Actful of the American Council of Foreign Languages, it did not give criteria for the teaching Arabic as a classical one. So we will try to get the criteria from the experience and the global or the main points of teaching Arabic as a foreign language, and then we will try to apply this for the classical Arabic.
For those who actually are watching us on Facebook, or who are going to be watching this on YouTube afterwards, so maybe they are excited now to learn Arabic, and maybe they think of, you know what, I want to learn with Dr. EHAB. So if you can also, talk a little bit about your methodology when you teach in AYAAT Academy here, about our Arabic curriculum, just some, to summarize this experience to them in a way that they understand that they're gonna learn something, right? It's 4 semesters, so yeah, if you can again elaborate a little bit on that would be great, inshallah.
Yes, I can say that we have like 4 semesters for the basic learning of Arabic language as a foreign language, of course, because we have another branch of Arabic itself for native speakers. So for non-native speakers, we have the beginning from the scratch, from the alphabet, and we have these 4 semesters. We aim to cover in these semesters A1 and A2 levels. We use maybe the book is different from A1 level to A2 level, because we are shifting slightly from the modern. We are beginning from the modern standard Arabic, and we go to the religious aims. We want to understand the Quran, and we want to understand our books of religion. So we are making a slight shift, of course, in choosing the vocabulary words and the sources, and you will find that maybe the 60 hours of the A1 level, they will give you the courage to enter to the A2 level, and you will be confident that you will understand some phrases, some sentences, and you will begin to acquire the grammar. These are the essential of the semesters we are learning, we are teaching in AYAAT Academy.
I got a question here from one of the audience. Assalamu alaikum. What advice would you give to a student trying to learn Arabic, but outside the class does not practice it because he or she doesn't have anyone to practice it with? Like everyone around that person speaks another language. So that's a dilemma. Yeah.
Okay, no, I want to say that now we are in the period of the audio-visual methods. So try to listen, try to watch. If you cannot speak with other people, with native people learning or talking the Arabic language, so try to expose yourself to the audio-visual sources and try to focus on them, how to get, and of course you have a wide, let's say, bank for this on the web, on the internet. You will find it, inshallah.
Inshallah. We have only like a couple of minutes left, so I would conclude now with a word from you, inshallah, about the importance of learning Arabic language. So if you can, give an advice to people about, is that important for non-Arabs, or is just something, specifically Muslims, of course, as we are an Islamic academy. So if you can say a word about that, inshallah.
Yes, of course, this is important, because I shall tell you first that scholars, when they classified the knowledge, the ilm, they classified Arabic language as part of the Islamic language, of the Islamic knowledge. So it is not, we say in Arabic, it is ilm min ulum al-kifaya. Al-kifaya, that someone said, let's have a quantity in the community that can talk the language and can teach it and can learn it. So Fard al-Kifaya and Arabic language, as you saw in my presentation, it is the gate for the religion. How to know the religion without the Arabic language? We have our Quran in the Arabic language. We want to taste the Quran, not only to understand it. This is the words of Allah. He gave us his words, and this is a great grant from him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give us his book and to teach us how to lead our life with his words. This is written in Arabic. So how I cannot rely upon the translations of the Quran all over my life. I shall know the Arabic language in order to expose myself to the Quran, and as well in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as the books of fiqh and other books. So we shall focus on the Arabic language itself, because this is the gate to understand the knowledge of this great language.
Yeah, that's true. I always tell to people here in the masjid and in the khutbahs that, you know, when you read translation, this is not the Quran, right? This is the understanding of someone else of the Quran, right? So you may need to taste the Quran, as you mentioned. It's about the Arabic language and the balagha and the eloquence, all of that in the Quran is actually this is the miraculous nature of the Quran itself, that you don't taste, you don't feel like why Quran is a miracle, right? Because you don't know the language, right? So I got actually another question, so I will take that as a last question, inshallah. I can't take any other more questions because of time. How many different levels are in the TFL? Only 2 or more?
No, if you went to the Common European Framework of Languages, you will find that it is A1 or A, B, C, 3 levels. If you want the American, you will find that the elementary, the intermediate, the advanced, and 2 other levels, which are the distinguished and the superior levels. These are the levels that are outlined for teaching Arabic as a foreign language.
Jazakumullah khairan. I will conclude inshallah now because it's already 2. We were very honored to have you today, Dr. EHAB. MashaAllah, great lecture and a great discussion about the language. Hopefully people start to get excited about that. By the way, our registration inshallah will be open soon, and we offer the diploma, right, which is a 2 years, but we also offer TFL as a separate program. So you may say, like, I don't want to learn the other Islamic studies. I'm good at them. Well, you can only take every semester you can take courses, and we only offer our courses on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We're going to stay 1 hour in a small group or a small classroom with Dr. EHAB to practice the language with him, right? So every semester is a 16-week semester. We have tests, we have activities, we have a lot of stuff to make sure that you receive the language skills, right? All the 4 skills of the language. So inshallah, feel free to register, and also you can communicate with us to learn more about that afterwards. Just a reminder that our program will extend or will still be, there is another week in our program, which is the last week, next week. We're going to have the story of Ulum al-Aqidah, and then we're going to have the concluding panel about the importance of the Islamic knowledge in understanding and solving the contemporary issues, focusing on COVID-19 and Jerusalem as 2 of the main causes that Muslims really have concerns about and want to understand how to approach those problems from the Islamic perspective. So inshallah, see you next week, everyone. And inshallah, subhanak Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr, innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.